Sten, we're live.
And welcome to another edition of In the Dugout with Mike Stenhouse, and I am your host, Mike Stenhouse. All right, so on this Tuesday, and as is our tradition, I've got my cap on today, and we invite all our guests to wear caps when they join me in the dugout, reminiscent of my playing days. Oh, God, that was at least 40 pounds ago. At least 40 pounds ago, we used to sit in the dugout for, even after a game. After a game, we'd have a beer, not before the game, and just talk about life or whatever we wanted with our teammates. Sometimes the opposition would come over, sometimes the coach or trainer. Not too often the fans. I don't think we ever let fans in the dugout. But the dugout was our little sanctuary. You know, you could be in there, you could be in your uniform. Couldn't be really seen by the fans, at least if you had one of those underground dugouts. So that was our little sanctuary. You know, you weren't in the clubhouse with all the bustle and all the people. Usually before a game, you could just go sit in the dugout before things got really close to game time and just kind of be alone and think things through and plan your game strategy and think about life and talk to your close buddies. And we do the same thing here. We just want to have casual talks with people. And today we do have two guests that we'll have in the dugout conversations with. First is URI economics professor Len Ladaro. And he last week published his October Current Conditions Index, which is a forward-looking index of Rhode Island's economy. And it's not very promising. So you'll hear about that from him. And then second half of the show, we'll have former Associate Supreme Court Justice of the Rhode Island Supreme Court, Judge Robert Flanders, former Judge Robert Flanders, and he'll be joining us to talk about some legal issues that have come up, both with regard to the Supreme Court in Rhode Island, with regard to some COVID cases that are ongoing, and we'll even ask him about his opinion on some of the national legal stuff that's going on. So that's our show today. Just a couple of other updates before I get into that. Tomorrow we will have Dr. Boston on. Who's very opinionated against the status quo narrative on the COVID-19 crisis and what the data is really telling us, what he calls it an unhysterical look at the COVID data, I guess implying, and we would agree that many in the media and many in the government are taking ahistorical. I don't know. I've always got confused on that. An hysterical look at the data and spreading the fear on purpose. So that's tomorrow. And then Friday, we're not going to have a show Thursday. We're going to have a show Friday instead. And that'll be first of its kind. That'll be Friday cocktails and in the dugout. We're actually going to we're going to pretend we're going to be in the dugout after the game, okay? End of the week after the game. And we want you to join us with a cocktail in hand or any other beverage that you choose to drink. And we have a special guest. We're going to have a state senator, former secretary of state from the state of Michigan. Michigan, listen, we think it's a long shot, but if Donald Trump has any legal recourse, or looks like it's going to come out of Michigan now, not so much Pennsylvania, although many states are in place. So we're going to actually talk to a state senator from Michigan on Friday. So be ready for that. Okay, few other updates before we get into the crux of today's show. All right, now it's official. All right, as of yesterday, the Electoral College met Every state had its delegations represented. And Joe Biden officially now is the president-elect. It is official. The media had dubbed him president-elect since, whatever day, November 6th or whatever. But for the last month, he did not officially carry that title. Now he does. Now he's president-elect. Again, very likely to be president, but it's not a done deal yet. There are still some milestones. There is still time. And President Trump and his team still have their rights. And Friday, when we talk to the state senator from Michigan, we'll talk about one of those legal challenges in that state. There are still balls in the air. Again, every day that goes by without anything definitive happening, the chances get slimmer and slimmer for President Trump and his supporters. But again, it's still newsworthy. There's still possibilities out there. In fact, one of the things that probably most in this local media haven't told you about, again, we'll go into this more on Friday, but in addition to the official electors, I don't know if official is the right word, but I'll use that word. The official electors casting their ballots in the Electoral College yesterday, 7 states. Did you know that 7 other states where Biden had the certified victory and where Biden electors cast their votes yesterday, but in 7 of those states, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico, there was a procedural, the Trump electors also formally cast their votes. And I kind of liken it's my term to like a provisional ballot, just in case, apparently, just in case the Trump team wins some of these victories and some of the votes in any of these 7 states are indeed determined to be uncertified or not legal. I guess you have to have it on the books that the Trump electors did put their votes forward. So again, this is not totally unparalleled, because I think a state or 2 in the past, I think even in the 1960 election between Kennedy and Nixon, that some Nixon delegates or Nixon electors, I should say, cast their votes just in case those election results in Illinois, which most people feel were rigged, but ended up going to Kennedy anyway through Chicago, the corruption there in Chicago. But anyway, but apparently it's a procedural thing. It's kind of a provisional ballot kind of provisional electors, I guess. So that preserves the right for President Trump to remedy any fraud that could be determined by having his own electors officially or unofficially, again, I don't even know what the right term, formally, I guess is the term, cast their ballots. They did that in 7 states. So you're not going to hear about that from too many people around here. All right, other updates. A little bit unrelated, but interesting. Our center submitted, going to get into the Rhode Island economy in just a minute, but our center submitted an official comment to the Federal Department of Labor and Training yesterday. They are proposing a new rule. As many of you know, we have in fact, I invite you to visit the website, mypaymysayri.com. We have a website that informs government workers in our state of their rights. If they choose not to pay union dues, or they don't, for whatever reason, they think they're too expensive, or they don't like the way the unions are spending their money on political things, or whatever reason, you have certain rights, and we put them out there. But unions are not required to provide, even though many of them are using public money. I mean, pretty much every public employee is paid with public money, right? Your taxes go to pay federal and state and local employees. But yet public employee unions have very, very weak reporting. They have very, very weak, they can be very vague. They can hide a lot of information that's not only important to the public, but important to their own members. I mean, many union members want to know, how are my hard-earned dues being spent? And it's very hard to find that information with current reporting laws right now. So there's a new rule being proposed at the Department of Labor to require unions, federal unions that have public employees, to be more detailed in their reporting, where their money is, where that public, because it's all public money, where that public money is going. So we submitted, there's a comment period, as you may know, for many of these federal rules where the public can weigh in. And we submitted a 5-page official comment just yesterday in support of this more detail. We believe in transparency for public institutions. And public sector unions, since they're fully funded by public money, we believe that's a public institution. Okay, tomorrow, as I mentioned, we're going to have Dr. Boston on. We're going to talk more about the COVID crisis. All right, national economy. Surely the pandemic has hurt the nation and the state, but the recovery has really been unprecedented. Even as many blue states continue massive lockdowns, it's really an amazing thing that we've covered so much. And Steve Moore, who many of you know, and we'll get to Len in just a second here. So Len, hold on. But Steve Moore, who many of you know, is a friend of the center, a national economist at the Heritage Foundation, puts out a daily blog, and he was commenting and put up a graph that showed how much wealth has been accumulated in the country in the 4 years since President Trump. And here's a graph I want to share with you on that shows in 2016, average household net worth was $96,000. And here we are 4 years later, that has gone up 29%, or almost $28,000 per household in just 4 years. That's an incredible amount of wealth that we don't often think about. During the pandemic, why would we? Everyone's thinking about the job losses and the loss of economic growth. But prior to that, I mean, it's really astounding what was accomplished. And that's because of conservative policies, not because of Donald Trump. Yes, but it's conservative policies, right? We love conservative policies, regardless of what you think of the president. So, but, as Steve Moore points out, that nationally, a lot of that gain is going to be in jeopardy. If Joe Biden erases those tax cuts in 2017 and puts other Green New Deal, other increases on our economy, on costs in our economy, on energy, many of those gains could reverse. Every single every race saw increases in household wealth and their holdings. And you may have seen a really interesting show I had, I think last month, with Ray Rickman, a minority advocate, a liberal, but a great guy in our state. And he talked about that if there was such a thing as white privilege, which he doesn't necessarily believe is by race, but where whites do have an advantage and where blacks have a disadvantage, let's put it that way, is they have not been able to build intergenerational wealth. And that often happens in the form of private property. Your house, a home is private property. It's capital that can be passed down generation to generation if you so choose, and that can help future generations. Well, many in minority communities don't have those kinds of core fundamental private property assets that can be the cornerstone of building wealth. So that's why private property is the cornerstone of the capitalistic society. So we don't know if there's going to be a downward spiral with liberal policies coming in under the Biden administration. But anyway, so we've got a stimulus deal that's about to be made that may provide a little boost to the Rhode Island economy. And we're going to talk about that economy in just a second with Professor Ladaro. But the rest of the nation is going to get a boost too. So Rhode Island while things might look rosier, we're still going to probably be falling behind relative to the rest of the country, especially here in Rhode Island with still a completely Democrat-dominated General Assembly, an executive branch, And in that General Assembly, even more progressive left or liberal left members in there now. So we'll see. The big question, of course, on the stimulus bill that it seems to be nearing some agreement, and this is a real sad one to me, is apparently Democrats are demanding $150 billion to bail out states and cities and towns, bail them out for their irresponsible spending and irresponsible never-ending tax hikes in the past. And they're holding back, and what they're holding hostage with that request is liability protection for many businesses, nursing homes, hospitals, stores. I mean, just think once these places open and they allow customers in, you know, there are hungry shark lawyers out there going to say, wait a minute, you didn't provide enough safety precautions. My client got sick in your establishment or your business, and we're going to sue you. Conservatives and Republicans since the beginning of this pandemic have been trying to get liability protection for small businesses. And now the Democrats are holding it hostage and they're demanding $150 billion for handouts to that. Bottom line is, we don't know what that final deal is going to look like, but either way, it's not going to have any growth in there, which I mean, no tax cuts. It's just going to be more spend. That will provide a temporary boost to the economy, maybe, but there's no pro-growth measures in there. So speaking of lack of growth, let's welcome URI professor Len Ladaro. Len, welcome back to In the Dugout.
How you doing?
Got your URI cap for me today?
No, I got Vanderbilt University. That's where my son did his residency, School of Medicine.
Vanderbilt. Wow. That's that's in Nashville, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, my son at URI played down in Nashville about, I don't know, 5-6 years ago. We went down there. I love Nashville. Great town, isn't it?
It is. It's really terrific. We really liked it a lot and stuff. So,
and they even on the Hallmark Channel, they have a couple of Christmas specials focused around the city in Nashville.
Yeah, absolutely.
My wife makes me watch them all the time.
That's cruel and unusual punishment. Interesting. You were saying before that we might lag the nation with this whole thing. That's almost redundant at this point. You know, it's I hate to say it, but have you noticed how history repeats itself? Were you around when we had the tobacco settlement?
Yeah, I remember it. Yeah,
almost all of it to balance the budget, which is consumption, a little bit to pay off the debt, virtually nothing for investment. Here we go again.
Here we go again. Yep.
You know, if I wrote out in 2 words, endogenous mediocrity.
Yeah, well, it's one of the reasons endogenous mediocrity. Larry, let's remember that one for pull quote afterwards. All right, let's go to your current condition index. We'll start at the bottom of your report.
Yep.
And here we are down here. Yep. We were at a 25, which wasn't good for the last 4 months, and now we're down to a 17.
Yeah. Well, partly, I mean, you know, this is compared to a year ago where we're not doing well. We're still far behind where we were, and this just shows that. And so my indicator, the score each month, is a percentage of the 12 that improved with rounding. So that was 2 out of the 12 improved compared to a year ago. And one of them, the manufacturing wage, is because the lower wage stuff is being job losses, and so the higher wage stuff becomes a larger percentage and pushes up the average. So that's not really.
Wait a minute, explain that again. Can you say that again? So you mentioned here, the manufacturing wage has been rising of late, but its values actually reflect the loss of significant number of service sector jobs. Explain that again.
Well, it's actually the manufacturing sector and service. If we could look at all wages, you know, for the Rhode Island economy, you'd see that the service sector is losing jobs, and those tend to be below average wages. So when you average what's left, the average goes higher, and that's what shows up in numbers like these.
Got it. Because we're all right. So we have those service sector jobs are traditionally low-paying jobs.
Yeah, and they're being lost a lot.
And that's one of the reasons why our economy is so weak, is we don't have a lot of good higher-paying jobs, right?
And we rely way too much on the industries hurt most by the pandemic: tourism, hospitality, and travel. We're way too loaded in that direction, so we really took a beating.
Now, is that just a pandemic-related problem, or is that going to be a problem for our economy moving forward once we start recovering from the pandemic?
Well, I've been arguing for 20 years that, you know, things like tourism, I salute the great effort those people are doing, but to have tourism as important in this economy as it is really shows a failure of Rhode Island to really latch on to growth-oriented industries, because we don't really benefit as much from upticks in the national economy, but we really get hurt by any kind of hiccup at the national level. And that's what's got to change.
You also mentioned in October an explosion in the number of benefit exhaustions. What do you mean by that?
The number of people exhausting their regular benefits went up 1,317% compared to a year ago, which is awful. Now,
1,370%. That's 130 times more, 131 times more.
Well, it's like 13. Yeah, I mean, so it's way up there, and that's partly people then still unemployed now going on the next set of benefits that are available. And if we don't get the kind of program that you were talking about earlier, some of those people might not get the added weeks of benefits. And so, but the other number there it's actually much improved, but it's still horrible, is new claims, which is a measure of layoffs. And those are almost quadruple what they were a year ago. And so it's not like we're stabilizing. And I think it's safe to say that just as the US kind of slipped a few notches, we slipped a few notches as well. So, compared to a year ago, not well. If you look month to month, we might have bottomed out, but that's not at all clear either. I just raised the possibility. It's only 2 months, and there's just a lot of things going in the wrong direction. But I wanted to make the point, when a recovery happens, it starts with monthly improvements, and it takes a while to take hold. And partly the way this happens, and I'm not being coy, is the numbers get so ugly, it's hard not to beat them. If you think about it. So it's just.
All right, let me ask you this. So I want some commentary here that you can either agree with or disagree. So let's get into subjective stuff here, right? So a couple of headlines that really, if I can figure out how to share them back, really troubled me just in today's paper alone, or papers today. One in Go Local Providence and one in, and if I can just figure out how to get to it. Here we go. So the first one was this, and let me share. All right, are you seeing? All right, stop share. Hold on, I don't even know what I'm showing anymore. All right, first headline was this. So the second part of this, Shikarchi defends shift of CARES Act money. That was money that was supposed to go to help small businesses.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. History.
Yeah, instead it's going to plug budget gaps.
Right. Exactly the same thing as the tobacco settlement.
Yep.
We haven't learned a darn thing in all these years. They say they know the distinction between consumption-oriented and investment-oriented spending. You could have fooled me.
So clearly money given to small businesses would provide a little boost to the economy, right?
Absolutely. And actually, a lot of them are right on the edge of going out of business.
Right.
I mean, they're holding on by their fingernails.
That's jobs, that's sales taxes, that's income taxes, that's
employment,
GDP,
the purchases from suppliers. Yeah, I mean, this just, I know what you mean. I tried not to think about that particular headline, but it bothers me. But history repeats itself, and that's what's so sad. We've learned nothing.
So there's really some work for Go Local Prov. Maybe later I'll have time to go through it. But just again, this proves that the political class and this new speaker more interested in saving their own goddamn state budget than they care about the budget to families and small businesses in our state, because that money was supposed to go to help people affected by COVID. Instead, they're using it for their own GD budget. I mean, just outrageous.
Last time I was on, we talked about that how do they end up with such a small budget deficit number? And now we got the answer,
Yep.
And, and nothing says the number that they say, even with what they're taking from the CARES Act, will turn out to be accurate. My guess is the deficit's even higher than that.
The next headline, and this was an op-ed in the Journal today. Again, these people, I mean, these are construction people.
Yeah.
Cheering the fact that in this period of economic downturn, when state budgets, everybody's budgets are down, that there's going to be $400 million worth of bonds to pay off. Now, by the way, let me go back. This first one, to support government, I would substitute to support left-wing special interest insider groups, okay, advocacy groups, okay, because they just can't stomach cutting spending for any any reason. They don't understand that not only does it hurt economic growth, but it creates dependency. This one is, again, private sector construction unions wanting their pound of flesh, wanting their money from Rhode Island taxpayers in the form of bonds, just so they can do their pet little unnecessary, stupid construction projects and keep their workers alive. So again, you've got the insider class getting the money, not the small businesses, not the families that the federal money was designed for. And now they have the gall to ask for bond approval to spend more on these special interest projects, from affordable housing to green deals to more buildings at your school, URI, and other places. I mean, does URI need more buildings that much?
Well, I don't know about that, but yeah, I'm not so sure we do. But the thing is, with these kind of things, they probably wrote that because they know that there's a high chance they're going to get it, and that's what's sad. That you and I've talked about. You've got to really be careful with how much debt you take on. We're not like the U.S. We can't print money. We can't do that kind of thing. And although you see some studies here and there that we don't have all that much bond debt, we also have a future and a past of sluggish growth, which makes it more and more of a burden. And if interest rates should start to rise, and I think that's a possibility, the burden of that really jumps up and bites you.
Well, what is the burden? I mean, it's not technically accurate, but to me, a bond referendum that spends hundreds of millions of dollars is just delayed taxes on the public, and taxes stifle economic growth. Does debt at all play into your current conditions index?
Well, it's reflected in places, but no, not really, not directly, because that would be a more long-term effect. But I mean, clearly, debt really affects how much it costs for us to raise money. And if we ever want to get into the realm of, God forbid, having a lot of investment-oriented spending, you need to have the funds to come up with that. And if we keep borrowing like this, we might not have the capability, except for paying a lot of money to do it, which could mean we have to forego opportunities we really should have taken. That's my big worry.
Right. But bottom line, more debt is more drag on the economy, right?
It can be. I mean, there's pluses as far as maybe the employment gains, but are they spending it on investment-oriented uses or kind of consumption-oriented things that flare out very, very quickly?
Right.
And in this state, they don't make the distinction. They don't know the difference. And, RIPEC, they don't understand that stuff either, which is unfortunate because they're supposedly the experts on this. And I really don't have a very high opinion of them. But, economics is clearly not their strong point. But this is the thing that if you don't distinguish between consumption and investment, then everything looks great. Go ahead, borrow money, go do this. There are some benefits. And since we don't do in-house due diligence, we're not really aware of what the costs are relative to the benefits. So bombs away. That's what our state does.
All right. So in that Go Local Providence article I referenced a little while ago, you were quoted at the end of it.
Well, just saying a crisis is a horrible thing to waste. And we wasted the financial crisis, and it looks like we're going to waste this one. We need to reinvent ourselves because in a post-manufacturing economy, you have to earn growth. You have to redefine yourself and make yourself better. We're not set up for that. And we're running this government exactly the way we did 40 years ago. And guess what? The world changed. You can't get away with that anymore.
I mean, if we don't change the inputs, we're going to keep getting the same relatively lousy results, right?
Absolutely. And they'll try and cover it up upstate and say, oh, look at how low our unemployment rate is, forgetting the fact that fewer Rhode Islanders are working even before the pandemic than 2006. And they hide behind a very misleading unemployment rate that was caused by a lot of people dropping out of the labor force.
Yeah, and it was also an unemployment rate that's largely stimulated by federal actions, not our own state actions, right?
Well, I mean, that was part of it, but a big part of it too, because we didn't generate all that much employment, was just people who are unemployed dropping out, so they don't get counted. It's a statistical quirk, but that's the way it goes.
So all right. So all right, so you're
out there,
yeah, I don't know. So do the holidays typically give an economy a boost? Or I know you compared year to year, but just quickly, our last question: what can Rhode Islanders, what do you see them looking forward to in the next month or two here?
Yeah, I think, well, normally the holiday season gives a boost, and a lot of retailers make somewhere around a third of their annual profits from that. They have a lot of seasonal employment. All that stuff pushes and helps you go till the next time where things are really, really good. And so my worry is that a lot of the brick and mortar places aren't going to be hiring anywhere near as much because they're not open as much. A lot of the little businesses might well be closed. So, the retail sales, the dollar value might look good, but the implications for the overall economy based on employment and all that are not going to be as favorable probably as it has been in
Well,
past
please
years.
tell me you don't mean this, that it will take 3 to 5 years before we return to pre-pandemic levels. 3 to
And
5
those were
years?
nothing to write home about. Now, actually,
Wow.
I felt like I was kind of bold. And then the guy from IHS Global said 6 years. So we're not set up for excellence. We're not set up for rapid growth. We just don't know how to manage this kind of economy.
Are you in touch with lawmakers or budget people up at the State House? Do they
I've
consult
spoken
with?
to them occasionally, but I think the bottom line is that they want people who schmooze up to them, and those
Yeah.
people will get, access. They'll get, funding, that kind of thing. And as a URI faculty member, my job partly is service to the state, and I'm not going to do a disservice by pretending everything's wonderful.
Why not? Everybody else does.
Well, because that's my job, and that's the thing. What they're not intelligent to know, you don't judge, is this negative or positive? The only thing that matters, and they have yet to grasp this, is it accurate? They never, ever ask that, because if it's accurate and negative, either they turn it into a positive or make the negative go away, but they don't do that.
All right, Len Ladaro, thank you once again for your sage advice, your excellent index, and we'll have you on next month, hopefully with better news for our state.
Yeah. Okay. Take care. Nice seeing you.
Thank you, Professor. Merry Christmas.
You too. Merry Christmas.
Okay. All right, so we're going to bring on our next guest, Judge Robert Flanders, who I see is in the on deck circle, ready to enter the dugout. So Larry, if we can bring in the judge, let's get him all set up in the dugout. Hey, Bob.
Hi, how are you, Mike?
Good. Are you outside?
No, it's just the background.
Oh, okay. It looks nice and
That's the
summery. I was like,
courthouse.
okay, you're at the courthouse. Oh boy. Okay. Did you win the case?
Still pending.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thanks for joining us in the dugout. Just gotta ask. You don't happen to have a cap with you, do you, for in the dugout?
I'm sorry, what was that?
You don't happen to have a cap with you to wear when you come in the dugout with me, right?
Why do you ask?
Because that's what our tradition on in the dugout. We're in the baseball dugout. You got to wear a baseball cap. You got one around?
I'm sorry. I wish I had known that. I
All right,
would have brought my
next time-
brown hat.
Oh yeah, that'd be great. You can kind of counter these Harvard vibes. All right, next time you'll know. Okay. All right, we got a lot we could talk about. First of all, with the governor being sort of in quarantine, right? Because the director of health has contracted positive. Is there any constitutional issue with not temporarily putting the lieutenant governor in charge if the governor is in quarantine?
Not unless the governor is thereby disabled from performing her functions. And since it sounds like much of the state government is operating from home under these conditions and using the very tools that we're using here for this presentation, I don't think so. I mean, if she was disabled mentally or physically, that would be one thing, but it doesn't sound like from what we know that that's the case. So in those circumstances, I don't think that there's any need to constitutionally hand it off to the lieutenant governor. And I think from the past, it seems like she would be reluctant to do that in any event.
Yeah, and I agree with you, practically speaking, that she's practically still in charge. And you're right, everybody's been doing remote. I just don't know if there's any constitutional provision that defined it more specifically that opponents of the governor would jump all over or not. But there's nothing in the Constitution that would cover our state constitution, right, that cover a situation like this.
No, not that addresses this kind of situation.
All right, let's talk about I should have introduced you more thoroughly, but you are first of all, you are a board member to our center. You are chairman of our committee on the Flanders Legal Center for Freedom, a legal initiative that we are starting to get off the ground. And you're a practicing attorney, and you're a former associate justice on the Rhode Island Supreme Court. And that must be a very small circle of current and former judges on the Supreme Court. And it looks like you're about to get 2 new members into that exclusive club, Judge Long and Senator Prada. But both have, and this was the governor's picks in recent days and weeks, but both have issues. And I wanted to get your feeling on that. First of all, do you know either of the two?
I have appeared before Judge Long in a Zoom hearing, but that's all that I have had experience working with her as an attorney. And I do know Lynch Prada as both an attorney and as a legislator.
All right, so for Judge Long, the issue appears to be that when she was in her current position, she worked with the Raimondo administration. We've all heard about that gym up in Lincoln, right, that tried to stay open, and then the state sued them and fined them and forced them to shut back down again, I guess. But apparently Judge Long, handled the administration's request for that declaratory judgment. And now that case is coming before the Supreme Court, where she soon may be sitting. Does that present some kind of conflict of interest where she took action against the plaintiff, or what would it be, against the gym owner, and now will be ruling on that case potentially? Is that a conflict of interest?
Well, obviously, it appears to some people that way, although, to be candid, every judge on the Superior Court, or many of them, aspire to higher office, such as the Supreme Court. And so, that's a factor that is omnipresent in cases where the state and the governor are on one side and private litigants are on the other. The difference in this situation, of course, is that she had already either been nominated or was at least on the list for consideration. And some people say that she should have bowed out and recused herself in favor of having someone else handle it when under the circumstance where she was under active consideration. But the thing that everybody should remember is that judges in Rhode Island, once they're on the court, either at the Superior Court or Supreme Court level, are there for lifetime appointments, unless, as in my case, you decide to step down after a number of years, or you retire. But there's no mandatory retirement age. And so that should provide a measure of independence once you're on the court, which I believe it does. It frees you from having to be reelected, from having to be reappointed, which so many other state court judges labor under. So I think Rhode Island judges do have more independence to do what they should be doing, and not be looking over their shoulder by either the electorate or the appointing authority not being pleased with their decisions. So I don't think it was a technical conflict of interest, but I think that some would look at that and say she should have stepped aside and let somebody that wasn't actually on a list to be appointed rule on this case.
All right. So before I go back to Prada, since you brought the topic of something I was going to ask you about later when we get to the United States Supreme Court and their ruling on Texas. So our state appoints judges. Many other states have election county judges. Are Supreme Court judges in any states ever elected?
Oh, sure. Yeah. No,
okay.
The majority of them are.
Okay.
And I used to go to judicial conferences when I was on the Supreme Court of Rhode Island, and a hot topic of conversation was always their upcoming elections and do you keep track of who makes donations? And to me, you know,
Right.
it's not a very happy situation where judges raise money from
Yeah.
the lawyers and others that are appearing before them. So
Yeah, and I can understand how an elected official, if they see a lot of public opinion one way, it can certainly compromise doing, a judge must do the right thing by the law, by the Constitution, and not worry about the politics of it. But so that's why I agree with you. I like the fact that judges are appointed and at least presumed have that independence and don't have to get involved. But yet, it does appear that even appointed judges are influenced by politics. How does that why does that why would a judge who's got a lifetime appointment, who's totally secure in that position, why do judges seemingly bend to public or political pressure when they're, to me, I don't understand why there'd be any reason to have a lifetime appointment.
well, the short answer, Mike, is that judges are human like the rest of us, and
No.
Are not immune to the same kind of influences that the rest of us are. That's just reality. And judges read or follow the same news broadcast that all the rest of us do. They want to be. They have the same need to be well regarded, and so yes, they do have insulation from political reprisals because of their lifetime appointments and not having to stand for reelection and all of that. But the fact is that that sometimes they are influenced, like all of us are, by opinions of our friends, who we hear from.
Is it about getting invited to cocktail parties like they always say? Is it about that?
No. It's I think that that's not, in my view, a very strong factor or any factor for most judges. Most judges are not sort of making a cocktail party scene. In fact, they have to be very scrupulous about who they hang out with because every time they do that, they invite potential criticism of who they're hanging out with and the like. So I don't think that's the issue. But it's just that, like the rest of us, we're human. We do have opinions. We do read things, and
Okay.
it's hard to isolate those influences.
All right. Let's go back to the governor's second nominee, a pick for the highest court in Rhode Island, Erin Lynch Prada, formerly a senator, and most famously, infamously, I guess, whichever way you look at it, for clearing the way for the I don't know, New York style abortion bill that was passed in Rhode Island a few years ago. But Rhode Island has a revolving door policy that basically says no sitting elected official can be immediately appointed into one of these court or other administration kind of positions. Yet the ethics committee ruled that rule did not apply in Lynch Prada's case. Explain it better if I erred, and what was your opinion on that ruling, on the legitimacy of her nomination?
Well, it has to do with the interpretation of the provision that you're referring to, which does have an exception for elected officials to statewide office positions. And so basically the question is someone who is nominated and appointed to the Supreme Court an elected official in the same sense that the governor or the lieutenant governor would be. And the argument that person falls within that is that they need to be approved by both houses in grand committee in order to sit on the court. So it's not just the governor nominating them, they have to be separately approved. And the issue is that approval an election within the meaning of that term as it's used in the exception clause to the requirement that you sit out a year before being considered for state office. And
Did
so
you agree
that's,
with the ethics committee ruling?
well, I think it's contrary to what the intent was. I think by the framers of the ethics commission, which and the 1 year rule, so-called anti-revolving door rule, which is you don't want legislators and others using their office to catapult them into another high position
Right,
in the
right.
government. So it seems that that having an exception for legislators to go on to the Supreme Court, because after all, the history here is that our Supreme Court was really populated by former legislators. They went from being speakers of the House.
Oh, is that the history?
That's the history. I mean, you think of Joe Bevilacqua, you think of Matty Smith. These are names who became chief judges, and unfortunately, some of the things
Okay.
that happened during their tenure led to the whole adoption of the revolving door provision. So,
All right, let's go to national stuff, legal stuff. Let's go to the Texas case, for those who, regarding the elections. And then I want to, after you get your opinion on that, I want to talk about it with regard to standing, because as I understand it, so that Texas case, just to review, that Texas was basically claiming that I think it was 4 other states not following their constitutional or state legislative statutes on how to conduct an election, and that it was changed, they claim, unconstitutionally by the Board of Elections or the executive branch, that they were therefore harmed, they as a state, who has a vote in the electoral process, because 4 other states unconstitutionally conducted elections for their electors, that their state was harmed. The Supreme Court, if I understand it properly, ruled that Texas did not have standing to bring that case. So again, correct me on what I might have said wrong, your interpretation of the ruling.
So when one state sues another state, the Supreme Court has what's called original jurisdiction. You don't have to start the case at the district court or even the appellate court level. You can go right to the Supreme Court.
Right.
But the general requirement of standing is you have to allege some sort of harm that's peculiar or particular to you as a state, in this case, and not just general harm. And so the issue in this case is what would be the harm to Texas and its voters. It was brought by the Attorney General of Texas and other states on behalf of the voters. And the argument would be that by allowing executive officials in these other states to unilaterally do away with legislative requirements for who should serve as the electors for the president in each state, that's diluting the votes of Texas and other states which didn't do that and followed the constitutional requirement that the legislature of each state sets the way in which these electors are elected. So this happened in Rhode Island as well, you recall, where our Secretary of State basically unilaterally modified the notary public requirement for absentee ballots and said, look, in COVID, we're going to do away with that and not allow that. And the issue there was, can she do that when the legislature had set a different rule? And that went all the way to the Supreme Court. And there too, the Supreme Court basically said, we're not going to touch it, even though it did raise a very interesting and important constitutional issue about whether executive officials, even in times of emergency or crisis, arguably from the COVID situation, have the power to do that. So
here is an article. So let me, before you comment further, put it in relation to this article I want to show you and the viewers. So here is an article from USA Today, who basically, he was taking an anti-Trump position here, but he basically said, listen, if you're really a conservative, then what the Supreme Court says is true. There was no proper standing here, and this Texas lawsuit never had any chance in front of a conservative Supreme Court, because a conservative interpretation of standing would would mean that there is no standing for the state of Texas. Do you agree?
I don't think so because, as I said, this is there is an argument as to why states like Texas could have standing because they can argue they would be harmed if other states were free to disregard the constitutional requirement of each legislature determining how they elect their electors. So, in that sense, there would be vote dilution from the voters of Texas if they were following that, but other states weren't. The problem,
and you think that's a legitimate argument for standing?
well, potentially, but the issue that wasn't resolved in this case is the so what issue. There wasn't any showing that change in these other states had the effect of giving the election to Biden rather than to Trump. In other words, even if there was a legal violation here by allowing their executive officials to modify the voting requirements, did that have the effect of swinging the election to President-elect Biden or not? And of course, the case it was just a filing of a complaint, so they never got to that stage. But it could have, and so. But the problem, look, Mike, the problem here that everybody needs to understand is that courts abhor getting involved in election cases at this level, especially when they could be outcome determinative, as they were in the Bush versus Gore case, because that brings all kinds of criticisms on the court as a non-elected group that they're determining election
as human beings. Yeah. Well, all right. So I'm glad you said that because here's my so. For the sake of argument, all right, and I know there's a lot out there on the left. Let's assume there was some of this fraud. Let's assume dead people voted in mass. Let's assume out-of-state people voted. Let's assume there were unauthorized absentee ballots. So let's even assume there might have been some machine fraud. It appears if some or all of that was true, based on my non-legal, non-lawyerly observation, every one of these lawsuits is being shot down for lack of standing, not on the merits. So if there was this kind of manipulation, fraud, unconstitutional election, or whatever you want to call it, if every one of these cases are getting shot down for lack of standing, then what is the recourse if this stuff really did happen, if not the courts? What's the recourse?
Well, first, I don't know that all of them are being shot down for lack of standing. Some of them were, as far as I can tell, dismissed for want of proof on the merits of the case. In other words, there were allegations of fraud, there were allegations of wrongdoing, but when pressed to come up with the goods and prove it, the plaintiffs in those cases.
But there's never been a hearing to prove it. Right? How do you prove it if you can't have a hearing? How does that work? How does a case get dismissed for lack of evidence if the evidence is never actually heard?
Well, you have to have allegations in a complaint, which, if true, would support the relief that you're requesting. So the first hurdle to pass is, have you alleged anything which, if true, would entitle you to whatever relief you've asked for? And apparently some of these cases didn't pass that hurdle even. Others, they were given a chance to come forward with proof that would change the election results, and that didn't happen. And other cases were dismissed for lack of standing because they couldn't show that the plaintiffs, were hurt by whatever happened. So it's a mess, and all of this occurred, of course, in a very compressed time frame where the courts didn't have, I think, an adequate time to sort it out.
All right. So speaking of time, so kind of two questions. So are the courts, in your view, equipped? Are the, given the human nature of judges and the condensed time, are the courts equipped to handle election disputes like what we're seeing now? Because I'm not aware of any case that has been fully heard on any of the merits. There's always a reason why we're not going to hear the case. these cases to me are important, not just because, I mean, the bigger thing is, I mean, sure, it could help determine or not who the real winner of the election was. But for future elections, I mean, if there is fraud or don't we want to fix this? So if these courts won't handle it, how does this stuff get resolved?
Yeah, well, that's a good point, because the compressed time frame is such that it's very difficult for courts to resolve these cases on the merits in this limited period they have to do so. So, but there is a doctrine in the law where if something can be repeated, if it's not finalized, the courts will often retain jurisdiction and pass on that in due course, so that for the future they have a precedent as to how to deal with this, even though they might be unable, because of the passage of time, to deal with the original problem. They can issue a ruling that will have precedent for the future. So it's possible that in some of these cases that might happen.
So I'm much more interested in the long-term viability of elections than I am with the outcome of this presidential election. And so would you think that some of these cases, if we waited till after the next inauguration, were re-brought up where the time frame does not have to be so condensed, that courts might respond more favorably and actually hear them to see if there was something unconstitutional going on or something fraudulent going on, so that it would provide a basis to fix it in future years? You know, do you think it's the pressure of the moment that is causing these judges to find excuses not to hear cases? And do you think once we got past this moment on January 20th, it might be different?
Possibly. The doctrine I've been talking about is something called capable of repetition, yet avoiding review. And to the extent some of these cases are indeed capable of repeating themselves because of executive official action, for example, before they can be adequately reviewed, then I would think that it's quite possible that one or more courts might retain jurisdiction over the case and deal with it on the basis I just suggested, that these cases are capable of being repeated, and yet because of the compressed time frame that they happen between the election day and the swearing in of whoever gets elected, it's difficult to resolve them in that time frame.
All right, let me give you a specific example of what I'm talking about here. So in Wisconsin, so again, to many on the conservative side, there seemed to be a pretty clear-cut case going to the Supreme Court there. There was actually apparently a 4-3 majority of Republican appointed judges, but yet they turned down a challenge from the Trump team. The judges said, you should have brought the suit before the election. Well, there's no harm. I mean, they would have thrown it out before the election because they said there would have been no harm. And now they're saying after the election, you picked the wrong time. So again, how do you use the courts? But one of the judges who apparently disagreed with the majority rule, I don't know if you saw this, Justice Rebecca Bradley. Here's a quote from her. And she's sort of, I think, admonishing her fellow judges. So I'm asking what you feel about the validity of her comment. And then do judges normally say this about each other on the same bench? When the state's highest court refuses to uphold the law and stands by while an unelected body of 6 commissioners rewrites it, our system of representative government is subverted.
Yeah. I mean, that has been a constant theme, and it's important because the federal Constitution requires that the state legislature and not executive officials of the states select the way in which presidential electors are selected. So it's not just a state law issue; it's a federal issue, and yet, notwithstanding that, the U.S. Supreme Court, in most of these cases, decided not to weigh in on that issue, which, as you point out, is very important, not just for this election, but going forward.
Do you feel the courts indeed are equipped to handle issues of this magnitude and this urgency?
they're equipped, but whether they're willing to do so, as I said, it runs against their natural inclination, which is to leave elections and political decisions to the elected branches of government and not to judges.
Yeah.
Because the judges get criticized by being too political when they weigh in on political controversies of
But
this
that's
sort.
kind of goes to my original thing, but declaring something, you don't have to declare an outcome, but declaring a process constitutional, unconstitutional, is that really political?
Well, it is if it has the consequences of invalidating an election and installing one candidate over another, as happened in the Bush versus Gore situation. Now, you could say that wasn't political, but clearly it had a political outcome. So judges are sensitive to
All
that.
right, all right. Last question for you. In Rhode Island, let's bring it back to our state. Taxpayers, and I'll have you explain it and then comment on it. Taxpayers generally do not have standing when it comes to tax and other issues in our courts. Again, that's my layman's understanding, and discussions with many other lawyers potentially. I don't remember if you and I talked about it, but in other states, taxpayers have greater standing than they do in our state. So is it true that taxpayers in Rhode Island constitutionally have really low levels of standing in our court system?
That is true. In other words, they have to have a peculiar injury to themselves personally that's different in kind and degree from what all taxpayers who suffer as a result of the decision at issue are complaining about. So yes, the Rhode Island very strict taxpayer standing state.
So again, like the frustration I'm sure the Trump team is feeling, they don't know where to turn. Nobody will. I don't know what they don't know what avenue or recourse do we have. So in Rhode Island, the same thing. We don't. There's something called an initiative by referendum. I'm sure you're familiar with that. Many other states have that, where if enough people sign a petition, you can get a question put on a ballot. A constitutional change or something else. Rhode Island does not allow that. Rhode Island does not allow taxpayers generally to sue. So again, what recourse, we're getting this question a lot with the COVID shutdowns and what churches, can't go to church in numbers, can't open my store, can't go to the store, can't go to a restaurant, can't go to work, can't open my business. There seems to be in Rhode Island very little recourse.
Yeah.
Should taxpayers and the average Joe in Rhode Island have greater legal recourse in the state of Rhode Island?
I think there's no question but that they should. In fact, I chaired a group that was pushing strongly for a constitutional amendment in Rhode Island to allow for so-called initiative and referendum.
Yes.
As a way of allowing direct political access from citizenry because of all these limitations on standing that basically preclude them from doing it through the judicial branch. And because of the difficulty of dealing with the General Assembly, you can petition the General Assembly, but they're free to disregard you. So Massachusetts, California, other states have initiative and referendum, and many amendments constitutionally and otherwise have enacted through that process. And Rhode Island, unfortunately, doesn't have that.
All right. So I assume then you would agree with me, because I think after the new year, especially if Rhode Island loses a congressional seat after the census, which apparently we're right on the edge. But we've pushed in the past, and we're going to start, even though it might be 4 years away, we're going to start raising interest in a people's convention, a state constitutional convention, where something like initiative and referendum, something like greater taxpayer standing could be legitimate constitutional amendments to give the average taxpayer and average resident greater legal recourse in our state. Are you generally in favor of a state constitutional convention in Rhode Island? It's dangerous and there's risk. We understand that, but where do you stand on that?
Oh, absolutely. I've been pushing that for many years, Mike, and am very much in favor of that.
All right, we'll talk more about that in future visits with me in the dugout. Next time you'll bring a cap along, right?
I will.
Okay.
My apologies. But
Former
it won't be
judge.
a Harvard cap, I assure you. All right. Take care.
Former Judge Robert Flanders, thank you very much for being on the dugout. Appreciate it. All right. Wow. Thank you all. Really great show today. We had two great guests, one an economic expert. Again, in summary, Professor Len Ladaro basically saying, listen, these our elected officials in the General Assembly just don't understand economics. They keep making the same mistakes over and over again. You want to wonder why Rhode Island is ranked in the bottom 5 in so many economic categories, has the worst business climate in the nation according to some nationally reputable organizations and indexes. Why? We're always the first in and last out of a recession and hardest hit. And they just keep making the same mistakes, and they're doing it again. And I agree. And it's just so frustrating that people with such limited understanding of economics are making such important economic decisions for our state. And the new Speaker of the House, sadly, is falling right into that same trap, catering to the special interest first, putting their precious state budget first, with little or no regard to our budgets of families and small businesses in our state. Now, these are people without any economic background. I think what's even more disturbing is the second half of our show with Judge Flanders, where people with a legal background, with legitimate courtroom and judge and legal experience, just refuse to engage legally. Don't want to get involved. Don't want to get involved. I'm a human being. Don't want to get criticism from whoever. I'm not going to get involved. Folks, that is not justice. That is not justice. Judges are appointed or elected in other states to make those constitutional judgments. And too often, the bad guys or the potential bad guys are controversial topic. I'm not going to get involved. Folks, this is not freedom. This is not democracy. This is not justice. We see it in Rhode Island. We see ethics rules openly ignored in the appointing of Erin Lynch Prada, who clearly violates the revolving door policy, yet the corrupt ethics commission kowtowed, gave into the political class and said, no, we'll come up with some reason for an exception to this. There's a reason people are leaving our state. There's a reason people are frustrated in our state, economically, legally, culturally. We'll get into that in future shows. They just lose hope when they see the system constantly rigged in favor of the insiders, constantly benefiting the political class and their cronies. And as we just discussed with Judge Flanders, and then offering the taxpayers, offering the resident little to no options for recourse. It's just nothing you can do. The system is so rigged. We're shut out. We're canceled, if you would, the cancel culture before there was a cancel culture. Regular citizens and taxpayers in this state have been canceled out of the equation for decades, for over 100 years, almost 100 years, fourscore. I mean, go on my website, on rifreedom.org, and read my Gettysburg Address, my redux, my rework of Abraham Lincoln's Great Peace, where I applied it to Rhode Island. For 87 years, since one party took control of our General Assembly, we've been catering to the special interests, and people, when our state is losing its relative population to the rest of the country, people just don't want to stay here. They don't see the hope. They don't see a political class or even a judicial system willing to stand up for them. It's sad, but it's Rhode Island. Much more to talk about in future sessions. Again, tomorrow we have Dr. Andrew Boston will be on. We'll probably spend the whole show talking COVID-related data. Remember our petition Go to rifreedom.org, and right at the top of the page on the left, there's a petition to demand COVID data transparency. We could end these lockdowns or severely reduce them if we only were working with real data. They say they want to make data-driven decisions, but yet they're not. And it might help revive our economy, might produce more jobs and wages for people. The government wants us to keep spreading the fear. And the courts won't help out those businesses who are trying to survive. People are trying to survive in the state economically and legally, and the system just overwhelms them. That's why we need a constitutional convention, a people's convention, as I call it. We need it. We'll be talking about that more next year. So we'll see you tomorrow for In the Dugout.